So it looks like Love and Marriage Huntsville star Stormi Steele has officially been sued by her former chief operating officer, Kyle Evanko. Now we have the court documents that we have to read through. So buckle up, get a snack, and let's read through this lawsuit. Welcome back to the Kempire channel, your #1 source for pop culture news and music, entertainment, reality TV, and so much more. As always, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on breaking news when we go live or when we upload. So as you know, we originally reported on this story a few weeks ago, and we were waiting to see if Stormi would come out with a statement or if Kyle would actually file a lawsuit. Well, in his original post on Instagram, which a lot of people said, why are you bringing this to social media? You're being messy. And I said to you, I wonder if he's doing this particularly for the record. And now we're getting more details as to why these two may have parted ways. But before we get into that, I have to always preface this by saying we still have not heard Stormi's side in regards to what went down, as to why these two decided to part ways. And I still haven't heard anything. And Stormi, please do not DM me. I'd much rather you link me to the legal response that you have for this case. I don't want to hear the side story. I want to hear what you're going to tell the judge in this case. All right? So before we get into the lawsuit, just a reminder, Kyle posted on his Instagram story. I did a whole video on this where I went through every single post. So we're just going to skip ahead just to remind you some of the things that he said in this post. All right, so he posted this on July 29th, okay? And he went through a story in regards to, and these were multiple slides where he talks about where they went wrong, how he lent her $30,000 to $40,000. He kept on referring to himself as a partner. There's a lot of details that we didn't know, but of course, I expected we would find out more specifics, according to him, in his lawsuit. All right? So he reminds us to skip ahead. So I want to skip ahead. I don't want to go through all of the things. Let me skip ahead to where things fell through in their relationship. So on slide 6, Kyle writes this. She, in reference to Stormi Steele, immediately asked for a full list of everything I do, and in the same breath accused me of intentionally doing so much to try to make myself irreplaceable and in an effort to hurt the business. We talked about that. I was dumbfounded at the accusations, obliged to providing the list of duties, of course, because, as I always would, follow the direction of my CEO and business partner. I also included every one of my contacts, vendors, and everyone that would be helpful should I, God forbid, be hit by a bust. The next day, on Friday, July 19th, I called Stormi asking to get clarity about my roles and responsibilities going forward, as she had the prior day said she was stripping me of some of my usual duties like payroll that I had been managing for about a year and was already in the process of handing off to a colleague. So during this phone call, when I mentioned that I sent a full list of everything I do and my contacts should she need to replace me, she panicked and kept insisting that I was quitting and resigning. I denied this several times, saying over and over I wasn't quitting and I wasn't resigning. But Stormi replied with many hurtful things like, including that out of all the people she has ever worked with, including those that stole from her. So remember I said I wasn't sure if the reason why they really parted ways was, did Kyle steal money? He's saying here for her to refer to me as one of the worst people she's ever worked with, and he's making it seem like I didn't steal from you. Those other people stole from you, and I'm the worst? He said that I was the worst of them all. This stung. She told me we are done over and over, and to talk to my lawyer, we said bye and hung up. Fast forward, at the end of this post, he basically says what he was offered in regards to separating ties with them was 1 month's pay. 1 month's pay. He said on Sunday when Stormi reached out about time to talk on the phone, I told her my head was still spinning and that locking me out of my email and contacting TikTok on Friday evening right after our conversation about cooling off really violated my trust. Sensing tensions were still high, I said I would be taking a leave of absence starting on Monday, July 22nd, having never taken a true day off in the last 18 months since we started working together. This situation's not even a month old. We're on August 16th. He then says on July 23rd, Tuesday, July 23rd, her lawyer reached out to me asking for a phone call to discuss Stormi and I parting ways, which was news to me after explaining the situation of the last few days, how that officially parting ways was news to me, and how I didn't feel comfortable talking to her legal team without representation of my own. I didn't hear anything from them until Friday of July 26th. When Friday rolled around at the end of the day around 5 p.m., my time, because he's in California, I received an email from Stormi indicating that I had been terminated as of Monday, July 22nd, on the day that I had taken my leave of absence. In the same email, Stormi included a separation agreement that meant I'd have to sign away any claims I have for my share of unpaid profits, 7 figures, any claims I have for ownership/equity, and my ability to speak openly about my experience working with Stormi and Canvas. This is also mentioned in the lawsuit, which we'll get to in a second. But listen to this part. Additionally, there was a portion of the agreement saying I could not work in the beauty products industry for 24 months, among many other things that could limit my career, all in exchange for 1 month's pay. Okay. So, like I said, hope you buckle up. We have a few pages to go through in regards to this. I am not an attorney. Okay. We will shout out to all the attorneys. Please feel free to weigh in. If you will, after I read this to you, you'll let me know. You'll let me know if it sounds solid. Again, this is just his side. Stormi will have to respond legally. And if she doesn't, there will be a default judgment. But she will. I'm sure she will. Especially because we're all talking about it. So it says Kyle Evanko and Evanko Consulting Group, LLC, plaintiffs versus Stormi Steele, Canvas Beauty Brands, LLC, Canvas Holdings, LLC, and Canvas Fulfillment, LLC are the defendants. This literally was just filed, I believe, on the 14th. And it was updated, according to the docket, 3 hours ago at the time of this recording. So plaintiffs Mr. Kyle Evanko and Evanko Consulting Group, LLC, alleged the following claims against defendant Stormi Steele and her business entities, okay? They talk about the parties involved. We're not going to go through that. We can kind of skip through all of this. They just kind of let you know their background on who's involved and what the companies are, okay? And where they're located. They also talk about the jurisdiction and venue. This court has personal jurisdiction over defendants because defendants are all citizens of Alabama. Then they give you factual background. The parties agree to equity and profit sharing. So this is where we are getting more details as to why Kyle is suing Stormi. So CBB is for-profit business based in Alabama, Canvas Beauty, that specializes in selling product body glaze for retail purchase by consumers nationwide. Mrs. Steele founded Canvas Beauty in 2017 and alleges with her husband, Courtney Beasley, to be the sole owners of each of the Canvas defendants. Mrs. Steele serves as the chief executive officer of Canvas Beauty. So in January of 2023, this is like a story time. I'm sorry, y'all. In January of 2023, Mrs. Steele hired Kyle, Mr. Evanko, on a freelance basis to perform limited scope marketing services for Canvas Beauty starting on February 1st of 2023. At the time of the initial contact from Mrs. Steele, Mr. Evanko provided marketing services through the marketing agency he co-founded, Crackerjack LLC, that's the name of it. In early 2023, when Mr. Evanko initially began providing marketing services for Canvas Beauty, it was on the verge of insolvency. And she's openly talked about this. She recently talked about this with B. Simone on her podcast. Canvas Beauty had existing liabilities exceeding $2 million and had hundreds of orders that had not been fulfilled. It was clear to Mr. Evanko that Canvas Beauty was on the verge of insolvency and needed even greater attention beyond marketing from an experienced professional. Mrs. Steele was so impressed with Mr. Evanko's work that she engaged Mr. Evanko to serve a greater role within CBB. Beginning on March 2023, Mr. Evanko began to lead Canvas Beauty's marketing, customer support, and graphic design, among other operational responsibilities. On April 11th of 2023, Mr. Evanko approached Mrs. Steele about working with Mrs. Steele on a full-time and undivided basis. Mr. Evanko was unquestionably clear he would abandon the company he co-founded, Crackerjack LLC, and work for Mrs. Steele and Canvas Beauty in exchange for equity and profit sharing. Do you have this in writing, Kyle? Because you sound smart. So part of me is thinking you would at least get this decision, this agreement in writing. Mr. Evanko sent Mrs. Steele a text message on April 11, 2023 that reads as follows. We're getting text messages, y'all. My ask for you, start thinking about what kind of equity split you'd be comfortable with if I step into a brand manager, CMO plus COO type role, meaning Chief Marketing Officer and Chief Operating Officer role, and help truly execute 2.0. We can do a dedicated call about it when you're ready. I'm not going to strong arm you into anything. It's not how I work. This is Kyle's text message. On April 12 of 2023, Mrs. Steele offered Mr. Evanko 30% equity in Canvas Beauty if they could turn things around. Damn, This is what he's alleging. He's saying that Stormi offered him 30% equity in Canvas Beauty if they could turn things around. That's in quotes, turn things around. Further explaining, she, quote, would rather have 70% of something big than 100% of nothing, which makes sense. I agree with that, Stormi. Yes. If he could turn this company around and make you start making money again, yes, take the 30%. Mr. Evanko accepted Mrs. Steele's offer and began his detrimental reliance on her unequivocal promise. By text message dated April 12, 2023, Mr. Evanko's reliance was as clear as day. This is what the text said. I got my eyes on the prize, and that's why I'm ready to flip my entire career upside down to work on Canvas and these things with you. True to his word, Mr. Evanko provided consideration bargained for by Mrs. Steele when he stepped away from the company he co-founded and began to devote substantially all of his time to CBB, Canvas Beauty. Acknowledging Mr. Evanko's acceptance of her offer, Mrs. Steele messaged back, when we get this foundation solid and start executing, it's going to be a windfall. On numerous occasions throughout the remainder of 2023, Mrs. Steele confirmed through text messages that Mr. Evanko was a 30% owner of Canvas Beauty, or at the absolute minimum entitled to 30% of Canvas Beauty's profits. And as you know, just a reminder, and this is mentioned in the lawsuit, she's had great success at TikTok, setting a new record of a U.S. brand selling $1 million in one live stream. So they've seen millions and millions, and we talked about this in the previous video, the amount of millions that she's seen. So as an owner of Canvas Beauty, Mr. Evanko did whatever it took to keep the business afloat, which included loaning the business approximately $40,000 and foregoing his $10,000 monthly payments from Canvas Beauty for his services. So is that the $10,000 that they tried to offer him when they set up the separation agreement? Because he said 1 month's pay. He's saying how much it is here, $10,000 a month. But he loaned, or at least put money, $40,000 according to him, into the business, but also was promised, allegedly, 30% of the equity. Okay. Mr. Evanko turns Canvas Beauty brand around, and Mrs. Steele shows the first signs of greed. That is in bold in this lawsuit. Mr. Evanko was the linchpin in bringing Canvas Beauty to national prominence by leveraging his pre-existing experience with TikTok to successfully promote Canvas Beauty and by drastically improving net operating margins. And none of these successes would have occurred without Mr. Evanko's substantial involvement. Look, Stormi, you're going to have to settle this. Look, I don't know what went down. I look forward to your responses legally. But it did seem you didn't have the experience or the knowledge, and especially when it comes to marketing or taking your business to the next level. You literally said on Love and Marriage Huntsville how he helped turn your business around. People that have watched your live streams, heard you reference him so many times and how important and integral he was to your business. And he's a young guy, so I'm not surprised that he fully understands social media. There are a lot of young people that are in these big positions at these companies because they understand platforms like TikTok. And he's talking about his pre-existing experience with TikTok to successfully promote Canvas Beauty and by drastically improving net operating margins. None of these successes would have occurred without Mr. Evanko's substantial involvement. Mr. Evanko delivered on his promise of, quote, turning things around that Mrs. Steele mentioned as the only possible contingency to his 30% equity stake in Canvas Beauty. By the end of December of 2023, Canvas Beauty had over $3 million in profits as a result of Mr. Evanko and Mrs. Steele's dedication to their company. Oh, he said their company. But based off this lawsuit, it sounds to me like there was no written agreement, which I'm actually surprised at, Kyle, because I based on what I've seen of you, it seems like you're pretty smart. I'm surprised that you would not. I don't know what the law is in regards to verbal agreements in Alabama or California, but I still would want something like this in writing. So Mrs. Steele and Mr. Evanko, as co-owners of Canvas Beauty, declared a profit distribution of $1 million from Canvas Beauty, $700,000 for Mrs. Steele, and $300,000 for Mr. Evanko. The exact 70-30 equity split that Mrs. Steele and Mr. Evanko agreed on previously, and Mrs. Steele repeatedly affirmed with Mr. Evanko. Do you have that recorded? Did she ever say it in front of someone else? Did she say it maybe during one of these live streams? Did she refer to you as her partner on one of these live streams? Roll the tape. I mean, okay, let me try to look. Attorneys, weigh in. Because TikTok lives are recorded. And if she has said some of these things on there, you might want to have your attorneys go get those recordings. You probably, and that means you probably would have to tell Stormi, because she probably doesn't realize this either, but I'm giving her a heads up too. But look, hold all the evidence. Do not burn, delete, destroy anything. I mean, I don't think Stormi even knows how to even get to that portion of TikTok. I'm just saying, she has said this herself, that she wasn't the most business savvy, and I'm sure not tech savvy person. All right, I've digressed. This is going to be a long video. I hope you guys are buckled up. Don't forget to like the video. It's an easy and free way of supporting the channel. Don't forget to subscribe if you're a new subscriber. We don't always cover Love and Marriage Huntsville, but I feel very invested because you guys told me about Stormi and this business when she just made an appearance on Love and Marriage Huntsville. And we were recapping it. And I was like, oh, let me learn a little bit more about her. Anyways, the remainder of the profits were to be invested into the company for even greater growth. Okay, so with Mr. Evanko bringing Canvas Beauty to new heights of profitability, Mrs. Steele continued living a lifestyle of excess and extravagance. Ooh. Over the next few months, Mrs. Steele began to show signs that she was feeling uncomfortable about Mr. Evanko's interest in Canvas Beauty. On April 18th of 2024, Mrs. Steele sent a text message to Mr. Evanko stating, I have anxiety about ownership in the immediate but not profit sharing in perpetuity or in the event of a huge sale. Emphasis added. Wait, this is what the text message said. I have anxiety about ownership in the immediate but not profit sharing into perpetuity or in the event of a huge sale. Upon information and belief, Mrs. Steele had not told her husband Stormi did not tell Courtney Beasley about the equity and profit sharing arrangement with plaintiffs as of April 18, 2024. When did she tell him this? Carlos, I know you're watching. Hey, thanks for the shout out. Your recent interview. You better ask her this question at the reunion. You better ask her, did you not tell Courtney about this business relationship or this business decision? She's probably going to be like, I never said that. I never said that. I never claimed to give him 30% of my business. Why would I do that? I'm already answering. The communication could not have been clearer between the parties, as evidenced by a text message. Oh, come on, Kyle. From Mrs. Steele to Mr. Evanko on May 2nd of 2024, when Mrs. Steele reconfirms her position on the agreement. And they put this in quotes. 730 profit share. Lawyers, is a text message enough in the state of Alabama or California, even though this lawsuit is filed in Alabama? 70-30 profit share is the text message says, and in the event of a major sell, 30% of the sell goes to you, Mr. Evanko. Is a text message enough evidence? Based on the continued false promises and guarantees by Mrs. Steele, Mr. Evanko continued to provide exceptional value to Canvas Beauty, including work managing customer service, graphic and label design, marketing, inventory and supply chain management, human resources, payroll, finances, product development, business development, and vendor relations. Meanwhile, Mrs. Steele began to plot how to extract the maximum value out of Mr. Evanko before kicking him to the curb. I mean, the way he paints this picture, it's very believable, Stormi. And your previous interviews and bringing him on the show and saying, how important he was, even in that now edited post where you made that huge sale on TikTok and you thanked him and then you changed it, trying to cover up your tracks, that's not going to look good for you. On June 8th of 2024, Canvas Beauty held a history-making, record-breaking live stream at TikTok, selling over $1 million of products in a single live stream. With 8 figures of profits in the bank, Mr. Evanko and Mrs. Steele once again declared a profit distribution on July 3rd of 2024. The distribution was made as follows: $5,166,169.74 to Mrs. Steele and $2,471,621.71 to Mr. Evanko through his ownership entity EGC or ECG. The profit distribution percentages reflected the exact 70-30 profit split that the parties agreed to, continually abided by, and that Mrs. Steele herself reaffirmed numerous times in writing. That's an important detail. Mrs. Steele, first of all, that's a lot of money. And now, as Stormi saw her business be successful and then her lose money, it makes me wonder if she did get greedy and it's just like, I'm giving this man $2 million. Well, based off of what he was doing, it sounds like he deserved it. Where was I? The profit distribution percentages reflected the exact 70-30 profit split that the parties agreed to, continually abided by, and that Mrs. Steele herself reaffirmed numerous times in writing. Mrs. Steele's distribution was technically only 68% because her distribution was adjusted to pay back Canvas Beauty for amounts that Mrs. Steele used for her personal expenditures from the company's account. Upon information and belief, Mrs. Steele habitually misappropriated company funds for her personal uses. That's interesting. Mr. Evanko and Mrs. Steele agreed to retain approximately $5 million of profits in the Canvas Beauty bank accounts rather than take a large distribution on July 3rd of 2024. By text message dated July 7, 2023, Mrs. Steele messaged Mr. Evanko, this time next year, your net worth is going to be over $10 million. Even if we didn't sell. And they emphasize we. Only a few days later, on July 11th, 2024, Canvas Beauty held another live stream event selling over $1.1 million worth of Canvas Beauty products in a single day. Like the June live stream, this success occurred with Mr. Evanko serving as the executive producer of the live stream. I didn't know they had executive producers of live stream. I guess I'm the host and the executive producer of my live streams. Canvas Beauty had reached yet a new level of profitability that could not have been imagined prior to Mr. Evanko joining. Alas, Mrs. Steele wanted it all for herself. To date, plaintiffs have not received an equitable percentage of the profits of the Canvas defendants beyond July 3rd, 2024 profit distribution. Mr. Evanko reasonably relied on Mrs. Steele's representations and assurances that both Mrs. Steele and Mr. Evanko would temporarily forego the distribution of the retained profits to provide operational padding for Canvas Beauty to their mutual benefit. Without those assurances, Mr. Evanko would have sought a full distribution of profits of Canvas Beauty. So he's like, I'm missing a lot of money right now because I didn't take that money initially because I want to put it back into the business while we are on an upswing. Mr. Evanko was deceived by Mrs. Steele, according to him, into deferring his equitable share of profits to build Canvas Beauty empire. All the while, Mrs. Steele was plotting on how to shove Mr. Evanko out of the company before her husband learned of the profit-sharing arrangement. Mrs. Steele continually induced Mr. Evanko's consent to keep reinvesting his profits into Canvas Beauty with promises of mutual wealth building. Mrs. Steele knew that Mr. Evanko would trust her at her word. He sent multiple text messages previously reiterating that fact. Mrs. Steele knew that she could take advantage of Mr. Evanko's honesty and trust. Oh, this is painting a dastardly story. Upon information and belief, Mrs. Steele continued to misappropriate company funds for extravagant personal use, including an all-expense-paid vacation to Miami with bottle service at a nightclub, a boat, and even Mrs. Steele's personal home expenses. And literally, they are flaunting their expenses and their lifestyle. Literally, I saw a video of Stormi getting a new car from Courtney, the new, that Tesla truck. Okay. Upon information and belief, Mrs. Steele has converted to her own use money rightfully belonging to plaintiffs in the form of company profits and had unjustly enriched herself at the plaintiff's expense. So he's accusing her of stealing from him. Upon information and belief, Mrs. Steele has used and continues to use company funds that in part or in whole are the rightful property of plaintiffs for Mrs. Steele's personal expenses. And here's the thing. No one's saying that Stormi can't use the profits of the business for her personal. What he's saying is that I have not been paid. So whatever extravagant lifestyle that you're utilizing right now, you're using the money that I'm owed. So in bold, they write, Mrs. Steele executes her scheme of kicking out Mr. Evanko. So on July 18, 2024, Mrs. Steele approached Mr. Evanko about securing a 409A valuation performed on the Canvas defendants. The 409A valuation would be a mechanism to determine the enterprise value of the business. Upon information and belief, Mrs. Steele, either on her own or through discussions with a third party, estimated the business to have a value of over $100 million. Oh. Coincidentally, while Mrs. Steele had the value of the company on her mind, Mrs. Steele initiated an argument with Mr. Evanko over a trivial matter and requested that Mr. Evanko provide an email with Mr. Evanko's current roles and responsibilities at Canvas Beauty and list all company contacts that he was the point of contact for. All right, I just got to say something, and like I said before, this is his side, but I've been in corporate America. I've seen situations like this go down where a manager or an owner is looking for a reason to get rid of you and will do little petty things like this. That's what it was. This is the picture that Kyle is painting that I'm getting from this situation. So coincidentally, while Mrs. Steele had the value of the company on her mind, Mrs. Steele initiated an argument, as I mentioned to you before. I'm not going to read that again. The next day, during a conversation with Mr. Evanko initiated about his roles and responsibilities moving forward, Mrs. Steele shoved Mr. Evanko out of the company he helped build and stated, "We're done. Talk to my lawyer. We're done." Line 42, it says, in an effort to induce Mr. Evanko to abandon the company he co-founded, joined Canvas Beauty, and remained there, Mrs. Steele continuously and intentionally, willfully, wantonly, recklessly, negligently, and or innocently misrepresented material facts to and suppressed information from Mr. Evanko. At the time, Mrs. Steele made the above misrepresentations and suppressions separately and severely. Mrs. Steele intended to deceive Mr. Evanko and never intended to act in the manner described in her statements. Mrs. Steele made these materially false and misleading statements in her individual capacity and in her representative capacity as CEO of Canvas Beauty, with the intention of binding Canvas Beauty and later the Canvas defendants to an agreement with Mr. Evanko. In reasonable reliance on Mrs. Steele's statements and representations, Mr. Evanko contributed his time and effort to the Canvas defendants, for which he had not received the full value of his work, nor has he received the full share of his profits. As a direct and proximate cause of defendants' unlawful and fraudulent conduct, he says unlawful and fraudulent conduct, plaintiffs have been and will continue to be damaged. Plaintiffs pray that this court award judgment in favor of plaintiffs against defendants for compensatory and punitive damages, plus interest. I don't blame them about the interest. Attorney's fees, plaintiffs' costs of suit, and such other relief as this court deems just and equitable. Mr. Evanko entered into a binding contract with Mrs. Steele whereby Mr. Evanko was given 30% interest in Canvas Beauty, complete with the right to receive an equitable share in the profits. Defendants, through the actions and inactions of Mrs. Steele, have breached the agreement with Mr. Evanko. Additionally, with Mrs. Steele denying plaintiffs ownership in the Canvas defendants, she has repudiated any such intention to abide by their contractual agreement in the future. Not only did Mr. Evanko and Mrs. Steele agree on multiple occasions to the 7/30 profit split, defendants jointly, though, Canvas Beauty made multiple distributions on a 70/30 basis to Mrs. Steele and plaintiffs, further cementing the undeniable legal intent. Oh, so that's interesting. He's saying that is also further proof of his 70/30 split and their agreement. The undeniable legal intent of the defendants to be legally bound by their previous agreement. Wherefore, plaintiffs pray that this court award judgment in favor of plaintiffs against defendants for, again, compensatory, direct, indirect, punitive damages, plus interest, attorney fees, plaintiff's costs, etc., etc., etc. All right. Plaintiffs reallege, okay, we'll move on from there. As described here in Mrs. Steele, has been unjustly enriched by taking, diverting, misappropriating, and otherwise receiving funds, assets, and other benefits that belong to the Canvas defendants. He said Mrs. Steele has received the Canvas defendants' funds, assets, and other benefits belonging to plaintiffs through the breach of their agreement that granted plaintiffs 30% of Canvas defendants. Mrs. Steele has thereby been unjustly enriched and should immediately disgorge the aforementioned funds, property, benefits, and assets that Mrs. Steele has taken or has caused to be taken by third parties at her bequest. Specifically, plaintiffs contend that Mrs. Steele is liable to plaintiff, Mr. Evanko, for unjust enrichment from the time period of April 12, 2023 through present and continuing during the pendency of this proceeding. Mr. Evanko provided his expert services to defendants at a less than market rate. So he's saying that he gave them a deal, a sale, and at times without payment altogether under the allure of ownership in the Canvas defendants. Therefore, defendants were able to acquire Mr. Evanko's services at a substantially discounted rate. Defendants have knowingly accepted and retained this benefit that would have otherwise not been available, but for defendants' unlawful actions and omissions, Mr. Evanko reasonably expected to be compensated for these discounted and often free services. Plaintiffs pray that this court will award judgment in favor of the plaintiffs against the defendants for the unjust enrichment and reasonable value of services rendered by plaintiffs. Woo, it continues. It says, as the chief executive officer and owner of Canvas Beauty, Mrs. Steele owes duties of care, loyalty, and good faith to the other owners of Canvas defendants, including Mr. Evanko. Mrs. Steele's duties include obligations to exercise good business judgment, to act prudently in the operation of Canvas defendants, to act in the best interest of the Canvas defendants, and to put the interests of the Canvas defendants before her own. He's talking about her role as CEO. Mrs. Steele breached her fiduciary duty of care by, among other things, routinely commingling personal expenditures from Canvas Beauty's operating account for her own benefit. Ew, the books. Mrs. Steele breached her fiduciary duty of loyalty and good faith by, among other things, making fraudulent statements to Mr. Evanko as a co-owner of Canvas Beauty defendants and seeking to disenfranchise Mr. Evanko from realizing the profits generated from the Canvas defendants. Mrs. Steele further breached her fiduciary duties, keep my fourth wall in, duties by discussing confidential owners' financial information to third parties in an effort to harass Mr. Evanko. He's saying he's been harassed. As a result, Mrs. Steele's fiduciary duties breaches. Mr. Evanko has been damaged. Prayer for relief, not prayer for relief. These legal terms. He wants award a money judgment against defendants for the amount that has been fraudulently and wrongfully withheld from plaintiff, Mr. Evanko. Award a money judgment against defendants for the unjust enrichment defendants have received as a result of Mrs. Steele's fraudulent statements. Declare the plaintiff's own 30%. He wants his 30% of the Canvas defendants, as it says. Declare the plaintiff's own 30% profit distribution right into perpetuity from Canvas defendants. Award reasonable attorney's fees, costs, and expenses in this action, and award such other relief as the court deems just and proper. Jury demand, and these are just some typical things that you will see in a lawsuit. In accordance with the Rule 38 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, plaintiffs respectively demand a jury trial of any and all issues in this action so triable of right. Here's the thing. I don't know if it will get this far, if it will go to trial. Do I see Stormi paying him or giving him everything that he wants here? Well, that's what a whole, conversations with each other's attorneys will possibly come with a settlement. Maybe his intention is not to have this drag out in court, and he wants what he's owed. But we shall see. So Mr. Evanko, Mr. Kyle Evanko, the former chief operating officer of Canvas Beauty, who we've seen on Love and Marriage Huntsville, has officially filed his lawsuit against Love and Marriage Huntsville star Stormi Steele. Now, Stormi, we await your legal response to this lawsuit. That's what I've been telling you guys since the first video that we did on this. I said, I want to hear Stormi's side. I'm not going to immediately believe just one side of the story. But the way he paints this picture and what we've seen on social media, what we've seen on the show, it's quite believable until we hear Stormi's side. Guys, I know this was a long one, but as always, I want to know your thoughts and expertise, because I know we have quite a few attorneys, some of you attorneys that specialize in lawsuits like this, that watch, and feel free to weigh in below. I am looking forward to hearing more. As always, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on breaking news when we go live or when we upload. Thanks for watching.
You bring the lighter. I got